So where does your energy come from? Are you solar powered? That's what we'll be talking about in this module. So this information comes from chapters 4 and 5 from our textbook. And in this module, the learning outcomes are for each learner to be able to recognize the cycling of matter, but the flow of energy in ecosystems, to identify the components of an ecosystem, to recognize the role of energy in ecosystems, and to list sources of biological energy. So we're going to start with an introduction to photosynthesis and cellular respiration, go into a discussion of food webs in ecosystems, and the last lecture video will be a discussion of biological sources of energy. Living organisms all require energy to survive, and the sun is the source of most of the energy on the Earth. Solar energy is used by producers or autotrophs to synthesize sugars. And the best example of this is plants performing photosynthesis. When we look at photosynthesis, the chemical equation for photosynthesis is that we take 6 carbon dioxide and 6 water. These are known as our reactants, the things we have before the chemical reaction takes place. And they are converted into the products of glucose and oxygen gas. Now, in this course, you aren't expected to recognize and memorize chemical equations. These are more just presented as examples right now. But one thing I want you to realize is that in a chemical reaction, the atoms that are present, they are not changed. They're just simply reorganized, rearranged into different molecules between the reactants and the products. And so you'll end up with just as many carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms before and after the chemical reaction. So this chemical reaction requires the energy provided by sunlight to be performed. In this way, the organism performing photosynthesis is converting solar energy into chemical energy. For non-photosynthesizing organisms, which are going to be consumers or heterotrophs, energy is acquired from food molecules. This energy is either directly or indirectly the product of photosynthesis. The food that you're eating either got its energy from photosynthesis or got its energy from something which was consuming something that was powered by photosynthesis, or maybe even there were 2 or 3 steps. But for pretty much all ecosystems, the energy present in there, present within the organisms, came from the sun. When we look at the chemical equation for cellular respiration, it looks similar to photosynthesis, but this time our reactants are going to be glucose and oxygen gas. And it's our products, which will be carbon dioxide and water. So, for cellular respiration, it is the products which are the reactants for photosynthesis. And likewise, it's the products of photosynthesis that are the reactants for cellular respiration. Now, cellular respiration, this chemical reaction releases the energy that was being stored in the sugar that was made during photosynthesis. In this way, organisms power the activities of their cell by releasing the stored chemical energy. During a chemical reaction, the atoms that are present before the reaction, again, the reactants, are the same as the atoms that are present after the chemical reactions, the products. The number and types of atoms do not change. They just get rearranged into new molecules. Looking at these two equations, we can see that the reactants of photosynthesis are similar to the products of cellular respiration, and that the products of photosynthesis are similar to the reactants of cellular respiration. Between these two chemical reactions, these become those, and these become those. And this process can happen over and over and over again. This is what we mean by saying there is a cycling of matter. So as we can see, the products of one reaction are the reactants of the other. The same atoms of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen are used over and over again. This is known as the cycling of matter. Yet even though the same atoms are used over and over and over again, and there's a cycling of matter, there's what's called a flow of energy. The energy only moves in one direction, even if the atoms move around again and again in a cycle. The energy comes from the sun, and through the process of photosynthesis, that solar energy is converted into chemical energy in the form of sugars. During cellular respiration, that chemical energy is released and allowed to power activity within the cells, and ultimately, that energy is going to be released as heat. Heat is the least ordered, least organized form of energy, and so, if that heat energy is released, it's not available to do other work. It can't power photosynthesis again. Once it's done its job, it's not able to power cellular activities. And so the energy flows in one direction. The energy that leaves the sun as light, which is a type of kinetic energy, is used to power photosynthesis, where the energy is converted into chemical energy. This is that sugar, that chemical product of photosynthesis. That chemical energy is used during cellular respiration to power the activities of the cells, but it is eventually lost as heat. While heat is still a form of energy, it is the least useful form of energy and has the most disorder, or we also use the term entropy. It's the form of energy with the highest entropy. Now, converting energy from one form into another is never 100% efficient. Often, energy is converted into a less useful form, and heat is the most common form of this inefficiency. Now, in this particular slide, we can also see a car engine. If you're familiar with operating a vehicle, you know that the engine is there to move your vehicle. It provides movement to the vehicle, and it uses gasoline as its fuel source. But as you're also probably familiar with, when the engine is running, not only is your car moving, but it's also making a lot of noise, and it's also getting very hot. Those two forms of energy, sound and heat, they're energy that had been stored in the gasoline. They're energy that is released during this internal combustion reaction within your engine, but they aren't really helping your car move better. The sound and the heat, those are forms of inefficiencies. Now, oxygen gas is needed for cellular respiration. And it is the reason that humans and other animals breathe. The only thing we actually use oxygen gas for is for allowing cellular respiration to occur within our cells. And yet we know how important that is. If someone is deprived of oxygen, even for relatively short periods of time, it could have serious, potentially fatal consequences. Yet oxygen, it's only there to allow cellular respiration to occur. The oxygen gas in our atmosphere is the product of photosynthesis. If photosynthesis did not occur, there would not be oxygen gas in our atmosphere. Oxygen gas is actually highly reactive, and it will react with many things, not just organic molecules, but also things like iron to form rust or many other metals. And so the amount of oxygen gas in our atmosphere is directly the result of photosynthesis. If photosynthesis were to stop someday, that oxygen would eventually be used up, and we wouldn't have an atmosphere full of oxygen like we have today. How does energy flow through food webs? That's what we'll be talking about in our next video.